Welcome back to Vulnerabilities, everybody. Today in our WPC Safe blog, we're going to be diving into, a new set of WordPress vulnerabilities. 17 of them this time.
Wow.
Now, we know you're all security pros here, familiar with, MHP, ARE, AT&CK, and kill chains and all that.
Mm.
So instead of just going through every single vulnerability, we thought, why don't
Team out a bit,
zoom
yeah.
out, see the bigger picture, look at the trends, the things that every WordPress security person should really have on their radar.
Exactly. I mean, just the sheer number of vulnerabilities, it can be a bit overwhelming.
Yeah.
But if you see the patterns, right, and you understand those attack techniques behind them, that's really how you build up your defenses.
Okay, so let's jump in. One thing that really pops out in this batch is just how many authentication bypass vulnerabilities there are.
Yeah.
Well, we're seeing it in plugins like WP Job Hunt, RealTO, even the Civi Job Board and Freelance Marketplace theme.
Authentication bypass, that's always a big one, right? Because it's at the core of security, controlling who gets in. But what I find really interesting here is all the different ways attackers are going about bypassing authentication. Like you've got RealTO, for instance. That vulnerability, it let anyone register as an administrator.
Oh, straight in.
Like, talk about a fast track to total control.
It's scary to think one little slip up in the code and bam, the whole site is compromised.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, how often is it just a simple coding error versus something more intentional, malicious?
Honestly, I think it's often a mix of both. Yeah, you've got the bad actors out there for sure, but you also have just, everyday coding mistakes.
Yeah.
Not enough focus on security when they're writing the code, and sometimes it's just the rush to get features out the door without enough testing.
Speaking of that rush, let's talk privilege escalation. That's another one we see popping up again and again in this batch. WP Job Hunt, again, Soundrise music, industrial theme, job career theme. Seems like attackers are always looking for ways to climb that ladder,
Absolutely. And it's not always about going straight for admin privileges. We're seeing attackers getting smarter, using tiny little misconfigurations or like weird logic flaws to slowly increase their access.
Huh?
Like Soundrise Music, that plugin lets subscriber level users mess with the registration settings. And what do? They figure out how to create admin accounts.
Sneaky.
It just shows you it's not enough to just protect the admin level. Every single user role, every permission, you got to look at it carefully.
Defense index.
Exactly. You got to assume a breach is going to happen at some point. And when it does, you want to limit the damage.
All right, let's shift gears a bit. Talk about a classic attack vector. Good old SQL injection. We've got Analytics WP and the WPCM member plugin. Both of them with SQL vulnerabilities. This one just never goes away, does it?
It's like the cockroach of web vulnerabilities, I swear. It's everywhere. Like, even though it's like a super well-known attack, it can still cause a ton of damage, especially now with all the data we rely on.
Yeah.
And it's not just about data breaches either. You got to think about content manipulation, disrupting services, even a complete takeover of the database server. It can get nasty.
And it's interesting, looking at that WPCM member plugin case, you see how SQL can be used to attack very specific parts of a plugin.
Yeah.
This time, attackers could mess with the database queries, specifically the ones tied to user memberships.
Yeah.
So they could get sensitive user info or even change membership roles.
That's a really good point. We are seeing more attackers focusing on these plugin-specific functionalities, exploiting the way they interact with the WordPress core and the database. So it's not enough to just know about the vulnerability itself. You have to understand how it can be used within your specific WordPress setup.
Right. So moving on from tricking the database, let's talk about attacks that target the users directly. CSRF, cross-site request forgery. We've got install WP Connect, and the Login Press plugins flagged for CSRF vulnerabilities.
CSRF, that's all about exploiting the trust a website puts in its logged-in users.
Right.
It's like you're hijacking their session, making them do things without realizing it. So in this case, with Login Press, attackers could use a specific setting to trick admins into, changing plugin configurations or even creating new admin accounts.
It's kind of disturbing how often these vulnerabilities exploit these little seemingly harmless configuration options, right? Things that developers might not even think twice about from a security standpoint. Really makes you realize how important security audits and penetration testing are.
Oh, absolutely. Every little part of your site needs to be looked at through a security lens. every single setting, no matter how small.
It's like attackers are moving away from that brute force approach and getting more sophisticated.
Yeah.
Finding these subtle weaknesses that maybe a regular security audit would miss.
It's a sign of the times, right? They're realizing brute force isn't always the answer. Sometimes it's easier to find that one little crack in the system, something people overlook.
Speaking of overlooking things, how about the classic expose credentials blunder? The Civi job board and freelance marketplace theme. They hard-coded LinkedIn credentials right into the plugin. I mean, come on, that's security 101.
It blows my mind, honestly. Hard coding credentials, it's such a basic mistake, but the consequences can be huge. It's like, why even bother having a lock on your door if you're just going to leave the key under the mat?
It just makes all your other security efforts pointless.
Exactly.
This really highlights how important proper secret management is, especially when you're using third-party integrations or APIs. You've got environment variables, dedicated secret management tools. There are so many secure options out there, and yet people still make this mistake.
It's a reminder that security is never a one-and-done thing. It's got to be part of the entire process, from development to deployment. Secure coding, thorough testing, and good secret management. They all got to be there.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, looked at all these vulnerabilities, and really dug into the trends we're seeing. It's interesting how these vulnerabilities affect different parts of WordPress.
Yeah.
Plugins, themes, even the core sometimes.
Yeah.
But the attack techniques themselves, they're often very similar.
That's a key takeaway, I think. The specifics might change, but those core attack techniques, things like authentication bypass, privilege escalation, SQL injection, understanding those is what lets you build those strong defenses. It's all about seeing the patterns and applying those security principles everywhere.
So for all the WordPress security folks listening, what are some key things they can take away from all this and apply to their own work?
Well, first and foremost, stay vigilant. Keep up with the latest vulnerabilities and attack techniques. Subscribe to security advisories, read the blogs, be part of the community.
It sounds like knowledge is our best weapon in this constantly changing security landscape. But there's so much information out there.
Yeah.
How do we even, filter through it all and figure out what's truly important?
You got to prioritize based on risk. Not all vulnerabilities are the same. Some are way more dangerous than others. Focus on the ones that could have the biggest impact on your specific setup. Think about the data you're handling, what your site actually does, and the user roles and permissions you've got in place.
So it's not about blindly patching everything. It's about understanding your own WordPress environment and figuring out how each vulnerability could affect you.
Exactly. And don't forget the power of community. Share what you know, work together on solutions, and learn from each other's experiences. The WordPress security community is amazing, really active and helpful. Tap into that collective wisdom.
Great advice. So we've talked about staying informed, prioritizing based on risk, and leaning on the community. But what about the more technical side of things? Are there any specific configurations or security practices that WordPress admins should really be focusing on?
Absolutely. Access control is one area that needs constant attention. Remember the principle of least privilege. Give users only the access they absolutely need to do their jobs. And check those user roles and permissions regularly. Watch out for plugins or themes that give out too much access to.
So fine-grained access control, that's key.
Yeah.
What else should WordPress admins be keeping a close eye on?
Input validation and sanitization. That's a big one. Really important for stopping things like SQL injection and cross-site scripting, XSS. Basically, you got to make sure any data coming from user input or external sources, it's all checked and cleaned up before it's processed or displayed.
Makes sense. We've seen how those vulnerabilities can be used to mess with database specific tools or libraries that WordPress admins can use for really solid input validation.
Oh yeah, for sure. WordPress has some built-in functions for cleaning up different data types, like sanitized text field for plain text, absent for integers, scroll for URLs. And then there are third-party libraries, like the OWASP PHP filters project. That one's really good, offers a lot more features for input validation and sanitization.
It's great that WordPress has those resources, but let's be real, not every WordPress admin is a coding whiz. Are there any simpler things they can do to boost security? Stuff that's not so technical.
One of the easiest and most effective things is just keeping everything up to date. Your WordPress core, your plugins, your themes, the whole shebang. Developers are always putting out patches and updates to fix security holes, so those updates are your first line of defense.
Right. It's easy to fall behind on updates, especially if you're managing multiple sites or have a ton of plugins. Are there any tools or services that can help make that process a little less painful.
Definitely. A lot of managed WordPress hosting providers will do automatic updates for you. Core, plugins, themes, the works. And there are plugins specifically designed to handle updates and make sure your site is patched. Just one thing though, always test those updates on a staging environment before you put them live. Sometimes updates can cause compatibility issues.
Yeah, better safe than sorry. Testing is key. Now, even with all these precautions, we know vulnerabilities can still happen. So what can admins do to proactively spot and respond to potential attacks?
Monitoring, that's the key. Keep a close eye on your site's activity logs. Look for anything suspicious. Failed login attempts from weird IP addresses, unexpected file changes, spikes in database activity, that kind of stuff.
So it's not enough to just set up security measures and then forget about it.
Yeah.
We need to be actively watching our sites for any signs of trouble. What about tools? Anything out there that can help with the monitoring process?
Tons of security plugins for WordPress offer things like intrusion detection, file integrity monitoring, security auditing, and some hosting providers have built-in security monitoring and logging too. You can even set up email alerts for specific events so you get pinged right away if anything fishy is going on.
So it's all about being proactive, staying vigilant. Security is not a set it and forget it kind of thing. It's an ongoing process. You got to adapt as things change.
Exactly. And it's not just about the technical stuff either. It's about creating a culture of security awareness in your organization. Train your users to spot phishing attempts, use strong passwords, and report anything suspicious.
Right, because even with the best security systems in the world, one careless click or a weak password can bring the whole thing crashing down. User education is so important.
It really is. And don't forget, the WordPress security community is there to help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Share what you've learned. Learn from others. We're all in this together, and the more we collaborate, the more secure we can make the WordPress ecosystem for everyone.
That's a great point to end on. Thanks for joining us today and sharing your expertise. This has been a really insightful deep dive into WordPress vulnerabilities and security best practices.
Happy to be here. And to everyone listening, stay vigilant, stay informed, and stay safe out there.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Own Vibes. Check out the show notes for links to all the resources we mentioned today. And until next time, stay safe out there.